all the things you need to do to create a beautiful garden.
Catch how to create a garden, only on the Home Channel. DSTV, channel 182.
Risk everything but your reputation. Today's news leader is brought to you by Shivers. Live with chivalry.
Fibre network providers are crisscrossing South Africa in the rush amongst telco players to be part of the national communication infrastructure spine. FibreCo is the latest to add its plans. It's now disclosed its rollout schedule. It aims to have part of its national fibre network available from early next year. Arif Hussain is CEO of Telecommunications. Welcome, Arif.
Hi.
And congratulations. Now, we all know data is a huge growth industry, not just here, but globally. Now, you're spending 5 billion rand over a 5-year period to roll out 12,000 kilometers of fibre optic network. What's been the challenges in coming to this point? Because it's been a long time in the coming.
It has. A couple of challenges. Obviously, funding on a project of this scale is a key challenge, and it's taken us some time to get to the point where we had the funding in place to start off on what we're building. But I think the single biggest challenge has been getting the permits in place to build a network like this. Ultimately, we're starting with our first 2,000 kilometer link. If you think about that, it involves thousands of permits to physically do the construction, including environmental permits and other permits. So that's been a very important factor in getting to this point.
I want to ask you about the license issue.
Sure.
As consumers, we know driving, whether it's nationally on a national road or on the municipal roads, for the last several years, everyone's been digging up, whether it's Neotel, Dark Fibre Africa, etc. And so we've got all these networks, including FibreCo as well. Will there come a point where the authorities will say no more networks, no more digging up?
I think there will come a point, but it's context specific. If you look at the metropolitan areas where people are digging up the same pavements, that's a certain situation, and it's distinct from where we are. We're building in the long distance alongside the national roads. Now, the routes that we're building don't have existing infrastructure, so we're not in that situation where we're competing with other people in the same infrastructure. I don't think that's really the main constraint. I think the reality is we have a big shortage of long-distance infrastructure in this country, and we think we need a lot more, not only what we're building, but what the other competitors are building as well. I think is very much needed, given the bandwidth that's going to be needed by this market in the next 5 to 10 years.
You refer to funding, the difficulty of getting funding, and if you look at your joint venture partners, Cell C Internet Solutions and Convergence Partners, are they the providers of the funding, or have you been debt funded?
Yes, so it's a combination. We're very fortunate to be in the situation where we have 3 partners like the ones we have, Convergence, Cell C and I, who are very complementary, but each are strong players in their own right, who have contributed a significant amount of equity into the business. In addition to that, we have raised the debt finance package as well, and ultimately that is our strategy, is to fund the network through a combination of debt and equity. What's critical in terms of raising the debt is being able to de-risk the project. So it's being able to plan, understand the construction risks, understand the costs and the timelines, and that's one of the reasons why we've spent as long as we have, the last 2 years, in that planning process.
So the funding is not wrapped up and sealed as we speak now?
It is. The funding for the first link that we started is sealed.
The 2,000 kilometers.
That's right. That's why we've been able to go ahead.
The debt equity ratio there?
It's something we not...
it's a secret.
Well, it's not a secret. It's something that's proprietary to us. We've put a lot of effort into our funding strategy, and it's something that we're very proud of and keep under our belt if we can.
Now, you've engaged ZTE to do the construction. What's their track record been like in Africa?
ZTE is a very important strategic partner to us. They're a major international player, one of the 4 largest telecommunications manufacturers in the world, actually. One of the reasons we picked them was because they have extensive experience in the deployment of long-distance infrastructure in the continent as well as internationally. In fact, hundreds of thousands of kilometers they've deployed, and that experience is critical to us to getting it right. They have done a lot of work in the rest of the African continent, and that's very relevant to South Africa as well. The other reason we picked them was because they have extensive investment in research and development in the actual optical networking technology itself. And ultimately, it's those advances in technology that we're trying to leverage. So they're a very important partner to us, and they've got a lot of experience in that regard.
Why, for instance, did you not engage Plessy, which is part of the Dimension Data Group, and with Internet Solutions being that might have made sense?
Sure. I think we're looking at different spaces. ZT is a strategic partner to us across the entire value chain, whether it be optical equipment or the construction. But ultimately, a company like ZT still needs to use a whole host of local engineering companies to deploy this business, this network. So, for example, if you look at that investment, somewhere between 70 and 80% of that is actually civil works. Okay,
so that's the expensive part, the digging up,
exactly,
and the covering up.
Exactly right. And civil works by nature is something which has to be done by local companies. We're not going to bring bulldozers from overseas. We have the experience in this country. We've done a great job so far in the World Cup and other infrastructure programs. And they will be using local subcontractors like the ones you mentioned, and many others as well, to deliver the network.
Then you spoke about all the other networks earlier on. So if you look at FibreCo or Telkom, the biggest, I think, with 140,000 kilometers of network, compared with your ultimate 12,000, there's dark fiber and Airtel. Now, are they competitors, or does one cooperate if one switches between all these networks?
Yes, it's a very important point. I think there are two aspects to look at. On the one hand, we think there's a lot more infrastructure needed on different routes. We call it diverse routes to the ones that are in place. The reason for that is simple. You know, if you want to get from Johannesburg to Cape Town or Johannesburg to East London, and you are a major operator like a Cell C or an IS or BT or MTN, anybody like that, you can't just have one transmission route. You need multiple. So the routes that we're building today are new routes that will add diversity to the routes that are in place, and we think that is needed. I think if you take that a step further, we also see us achieving this 12,000 kilometer target through infrastructure sharing with other parties. So once you have a certain amount of infrastructure, you can also swap with other parties on other routes to build out that footprint. But it's important to note that we are very much complementary to the networks that are there, and that's really our strategy in terms of growing the network. And frankly, that's something around the world.
Yes.
If you're spending 70 to 80% of the cost in physically digging, it really doesn't make sense to be competing with each other in civil engineering.
Yes.
Ultimately, you need the network, and we should be competing with each other in services, innovation, affordability. That's where
Yes.
the game is, really.
Then, Arif, in selling your infrastructure, you've got 3 clients signed up, of course, Cell C and Internet Solutions, but also British Telecom. How many
Yes.
clients do you need to make it viable?
Well, the business is viable today. We're very
With
lucky.
those 3 clients?
It is viable, yes. But the beauty of the model that we have, which is an open access model, is it lends itself to any number of new customers coming on board. Realistically, I would see 6 to 8 as being the sweet spot, because it is ultimately a wholesale game, and there are a lot of other players that will deliver services to end customers. But as we sit here today, we're comfortable with where we are.
What sort of margins are needed in this industry to pay back, for instance, this 5 billion, depending on how you structure it, of course?
Yes.
Is it a telco type of margin, 40, 45%, smaller, say a 10% margin?
It's a much tighter margin. Ultimately, we're talking about getting a return on infrastructure with a limited upside. Our main focus, to be honest, is as an enabler of high-capacity broadband. I think the opportunity to innovate and the opportunity to create better value propositions, both for operators and for customers, is in using that infrastructure to deliver better and better services. So ultimately, we're an enabler. It's not about the margins we create. Our main job is to pay off the infrastructure and generate an acceptable return for our shareholders. I think the real exciting story is what that network will do in terms of services and broadband for the customer.
Arif, thank you very much. That's Arif Hussain. He's CEO of FibreCo Telecommunications. By early next year, they'll have 2,000 kilometers of network available up and running in South Africa.
Risk everything but your reputation. Today's leader was brought to you by Shivers. Live with chivalry.
Every little bit helps. Like this TV ad. It literally saves electricity because it only lights up a small part of your screen. Colorful moving pictures would have used a lot more power for something you don't really need. After all, you get the message. Just switch off what you don't need. 49M. Remember your power.
119 data points. This is what we can gather from an ordinary crash test dummy. 2 million data points. This is what we can gather from a Lexus crash test genius. pursue industry-leading safety, you don't just engineer breakthroughs in simulation technology. You engineer amazing.